So I finished the Netflix documentary Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy Tapes, and I didn't like it. There were some good parts, but I guess the bad parts just outweighed the good parts. So let's start with the good parts. What I liked about it was how they went through the story. The story was set up in a clear chronological order, and they interviewed people who were involved with the Bundy cases, which was interesting because the viewer was guided through the story was mainly through the testimonies of the people being interviewed. And the way that the interviews were set up was nice. The people were all being interviewed in the same house, I think. Although every person was put in a different room, which kept the ambience of the interviews the same, but at the same time the change of backdrop was nice. And the house seemed really beautiful, so I liked that part also. I liked the people being interviewed because I felt that gave a more intimate impression of what was going on behind the scenes before, during, and after they caught Bundy. And I also liked some of the editing, like when they showed the newspaper articles, but that's just personal preference. And I think that was it when it comes to the good things. Now on to the bad things. The first thing I thought when I was watching this documentary, I was watching it with my best friend and we were at the first episode and I was immediately like, why do they keep calling Ted Bundy handsome?
He was a very nice person.
With a charming air in court.
He was a good-looking guy.
He was a straightforward, clean-cut, four-square, Richard Nixon Republican.
He was the kind of guy you'd want your sister to marry.
They were complimenting him so much. I just kept it to myself until we got to the second episode and it happened again.
I felt that he was a handsome young man.
And I was just like, why are you complimenting this insane man? I didn't really understand that and it made me kind of sick. They never made him look any worse in any of the other episodes, and yeah. So I then asked my friend if he also realized that they were doing that, and he also found it odd. Because in the end, we are talking about serial killer Ted Bundy. It was almost like they were saying, hey, this guy might have killed a lot of women, but let's not forget he was also very intelligent and charming and handsome. I felt it was really inappropriate, and I was kind of hoping that in the other two episodes they would start bashing him more because he's an evil person. And they didn't. At all. They even showed a clip at one point where the judge said that he was sad when they convicted him to death row because Bundy held so much potential and he would have made a good lawyer.
It's a tragedy for this court to see. It's such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. If you made a good lawyer, I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself. I don't have any animosity to you. I want you to know that.
If you are familiar with the Ted Bundy cases, then I think you will be disappointed with this documentary because most of the things that were said in the documentary we already knew, and it was called the Ted Bundy Tapes, but you maybe hear like 5 minutes of footage every episode. Where are the rest of the tapes? I believe at one point they said there were like 100 hours of recorded material of Ted Bundy.
And over the next 6 months, we recorded between 75 and 80 tapes, roughly 100 hours of recorded conversation.
So I thought the documentary was going to be led by the tapes, but instead the documentary was led by the people that they interviewed. And every once in a while they would add some footage of the tapes. So that was really disappointing. Where was the rest? Were those the only interesting parts of the tapes? Because to me it just sounded like delusional mumblings of a psychopath. It was nothing interesting and it wasn't insightful, so it was really disappointing. But back to his crimes. They never say how gruesome his crimes actually were. My friend doesn't know as much about Ted Bundy as I do, and so I told him some of the details of some of the murders, and he was both mind blown and disgusted. Though in the documentary, they never really go into detail how heinous his crimes actually were. It just kind of sounds like he strangled a girl here and there, and that's it. But his crimes are so much worse than that. It was really sad that they didn't really say anything about that. Sometimes you heard a person that was interviewed say how foul Ted Bundy was and stuff, but in the documentary itself, they never backed that up with any evidence. Like, for example, one of Ted Bundy's victims had a hairspray bottle jammed up in her nether region. And that's insane. It is one thing to mass kill a bunch of women. It is another thing to defile them like that. But that was who Ted Bundy was. He was insane. He was so insane he would shove a hairspray bottle inside of someone, and they never mentioned that. They never mentioned any of the details of his crimes, and that to me was just so very disrespectful, I felt, towards the victims, because they kept hyping him up in interviews and all the news segments that they showed, and other people talked about him. They kept calling him charming and handsome, and they never juxtaposed it with all the bad things that he had actually done. Like, yeah, he murdered some people, but that wasn't just it. Bundy was known for his horrible crimes and how violent and how horrible they were, and I don't really want to go into detail because first of all, I don't want to talk about it, and second of all, YouTube will probably delete my video, I don't know. So if you want to know more, there are tons of blogs, websites, and Wikipedia probably has more information than this documentary. So I would definitely look into this if you are interested in these types of things. What I also found annoying was, while I was watching documentary, was that Bundy killed a 12-year-old girl. And he only killed women. So why that 12-year-old girl? They never talked about that. They brought it up. And they just left it there. And they did that a lot. They brought something up and they just left it there. And you were kind of like, okay, are we going to go back to that? But they never did. And it was really annoying. And you probably have to watch other documentaries or do your own research to actually get answers. There was, by the way, another thing that I liked. I can't really remember if any of the other documentaries that I ever watched went so into depth with this. But it was the fact that he escaped prison twice and how incompetent the people were who let him escape like that. It was hilarious to watch. I was just facepalming the entire time and saying, oh no, they didn't. And in the end, they didn't even catch him. He basically walked back into prison himself and said, I'm hungry and I want to shower, basically. So that was interesting. Then there was something about the editing. As I said before, most of the editing I actually liked. And I liked how the interviews were very static and how they kept alternating from like more static shots of the interviews and then the more chaotic shots from the news and stuff like that. I liked that. But I think it was in the first 2 episodes, they did a lot of this really flashy, fast editing. And there was this one, like at one point, they did this really flashy, fast editing and they just kept going and going and going and going and going. I was like, okay, you should have quit after 5 seconds. Like, it's okay if they want to have it in there every once in a while, but they just kept doing it randomly. And then when they did it, they went on for way too long. Like, this one scene, they just kept going on for what felt like a minute. That was insane and it didn't fit and it wasn't nice. And then they also showed, that was especially in the first 2 episodes, they kept showing nudish women. It was also in the intro, I believe, of the first episode. Or like some picture were actually, I think, straight up nude women. And after the second episode, they quit doing that. And I was like, okay, but how was that relevant to begin with? And then later, they brought it back, I think in the last episode where Bundy more or less blames his killings on pornography. And I was like, did they try to foreshadow or something? It was just so strange. And also the fact that the really fast editing was only in the first 2 episodes, and then in the 3rd and 4th one, basically not at all. It was like different people edited those things, and I didn't like that because it felt really inconsistent. I think this kind of sums up everything what I liked and disliked about the documentary. What I just really hated the most was how much they downplayed his crimes and they made him look better than he actually was. I think I read a review on the internet, or at least someone on the internet said something like this wasn't a show about his confessions, but a show about him. And I found that so accurate. The documentary is called Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy Tapes. This isn't a conversation with him though. There is also no tape material used, so it is like clickbait. And that's kind of sad, especially because Ted Bundy really loved being in the spotlight and he loved the attention. And I felt that was disrespectful towards all his victims. And I also felt that I didn't learn anything new about Ted Bundy or his victims or about the cases in general or about him or his psyche. Like, I just didn't feel like I learned anything new while watching this documentary, and therefore I find it a bad documentary.
The narcissist in him adored the attention.
They were wrong.
Smile, Ted.